Hey, all. So, welcome back to episode 2, David's Baseball Card Philosophy. Today, we're going to be looking at something that I think is really interesting. This is a 1910, April 23rd, uh, Boston Red Sox ticket stub. This was pulled from a scrapbook. Um, and I kind of just want to talk about this concept because I think it's really important. Um, First, right, this is was from one of the last years of the Huntington Grounds Stadium that the Red Sox played at, and right before, kind of leading into the start of their big dynasty in the 1910s. Smokey Joe Wood was a part of the team at this time, right? Obviously, you have Tris Speaker, um, some really great players. I think Ray Collins was kind of the primary pitcher at this time. Um, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of his name, but it was Eddie Plank and Eddie Cicotte. I think it's Cicotte. Um, 11 innings when I think the A's won in the 11th with 2 runs. Both pitched a complete game, right? Kind of one of those classic dead ball era duels between two of the absolute greatest at the time. Kind of want to see how long this actually went, this game. Yeah, 2.5 hours. Only 1,400 in attendance that day, Saturday. Looks like I was gonna say it looked like Frank Baker had a home run for a second, but not the case, I don't think. Home run by Bill Kerrigan, interestingly. Tris Speaker 0 for 5, unfortunately. But that's not really what this is about. This symbolizes an idea that I've kind of been circling for a while. In terms of baseball cards, photos, letters, documents, etc., what have you. Um, this is about the idea of baseball history as Ostraca, or like shards or fragments. And just Ostraca is just basically like a stone or a fragment that turned into a writing source historically, but it's a really strong metaphor because kind of what we're doing with baseball history, whether it's baseball cards or photos, whatever it is that you collect or you like to study, we're kind of trying to reassemble a time through the remnants of that time and referring back to it, trying to bring it into the present. And so an item like this, I think, is a really great example. It might be on this side when the video gets published, but it's a really great example of pulling history into the present through the remnant or the relic of the artifact itself. I'll probably end up writing an essay on this because I think it's really potent, and it's not particularly surprising to me that a lot of the historical ephemera for baseball exists in paper form. I mean, obviously, you have objects like trinkets and toys and memorabilia, whether it's gloves or bats or even games. Um, it's a question of what remains, right? And why are we pulled to certain objects? Um, I think baseball cards for me are really interesting because it's like the quality of the paper, it's the thickness and the sturdiness of the paper. There's a difference between newspaper, magazine paper, and cardboard, right? Which is a baseball card, or even the thickness of a ticket stub. I think you would say really that ticket stubs are just a slightly less kind of thick form of cardboard, or kind of grainy, dense paper for the most part. They have a quality of withstanding time that I think is much harder to bring a newspaper or a magazine kind of into the future. I have a couple of like, I guess it's like 1919, like Black Sox, like New York Times midweek. I think it's the pictorial magazines. Um, Very brittle. So 1910, right? I mean, this is over 100 years ago. Um, this is a live historical object and document, right? That's not a symbol of a historical event like a card is. A card is kind of is referential to a player. It's meant to symbolize or stand in, like an icon. A really good example of that is the 1915 baseball magazine supplement. I won't share it here, but of Christy Mathewson. Um, it's a painted kind of icon that's it was meant to be cut out and framed. It says on the paper itself. So, kind of what we're looking at here with this ticket stub is a remnant of a time that no longer exists in a couple of different ways, right? I mean, obviously, 1910, very long time ago. Huntington Grounds, very far gone, right? 1912 was the beginning of Fenway, right? So this was, I think, the second to last year. 1911 was the last year. Um, there is a quality of aliveness which cannot be retained or held onto from that period, but the question of what survives is really interesting to me historically. And that's kind of the idea, right, of the historical artifact or the relic. And that's kind of how I approach baseball history or collecting or thinking about these kinds of objects, right? Because to many other people, this would just be a kind of strange piece of ephemera, right? It's a fragment. It's not even a complete ticket. It's ripped in two places. But you can see the kind of very careful, almost like local artisan design quality of this. It's a beautiful design for a ticket. This is just something that you don't see anymore. You didn't even see as the 1910s progressed. There's an element of craftsmanship and care that was put into the typographic design and arrangement of the stuff itself. Um, Almost quote unquote casual work of art. Um, this is what to me is so interesting, I think, particularly about early baseball history, is that it's very hard to remember. And a big part of that is because there's a pretty severe lack, just due to the technology that was available at the time, of images, right? The baseball image in terms of photographic representation um, was something that was not accessible or available um, to the general public until the latter part of the first decade of the 1900s, as in 1900 to 1909. Um, Before that, you have illustrative representations in issues like Harper's Weekly, um, or you have paintings. Um, it's the really interesting part of early baseball cards, right? Is that these are some of the earliest photographic representations of baseball players that exist. There's the early cabinets and those kind of old judges um, that were available. But I would say those are not really general public artifacts, and they give insights into a player, usually in a posed studio type of environment, which was common also in the CDVs of that time, the cartes de visites, which almost functioned like early cards. Uh, so the question of what remains, I think, to me is a lot more historically immediate and direct. It's a direct encounter with history. And this is the interesting thing about baseball cards, is that they're a direct encounter with a period of time, but they're also symbolic. They represent a player. They represent a moment in time, less than they are a historical event themselves. So I'll kind of be talking about that dynamic kind of tension about historical artifacts in particular. But this ticket stub right here really does grab me precisely because of its fragmentary uh, existence, right? I'll show you the back here. There you go. Yeah, this is I mean, obviously pulled from a scrapbook. It'd be interesting to be able to read this writing on the back here, but this I'm sure this just has to do with the general admission rules. Um, there's a lot of power to me in the fragment, and I've written about this a fair bit in some Saber articles for strip cards. There is the idea of the hand cut, or kind of what remains of the hand cut. A lot of these strip cards, the 20 strip cards in particular, are very small, very irregular shaped. Um, they're not so strictly baseball cards. They're artifacts of history. They don't exist in such strict terms. And this ticket stub, it's almost unrecognizable because of its kind of fragmentary nature. And I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. Let me think. Maybe that's just as simple as this video is. Um, there will be more stuff like this, but I think it's rare to find, in my experience, historical objects that are kind of torn from their genre, right? Again, like a lot of ticket stubs, that it's you usually find an intact ticket stub. And I even find it interesting with older baseball cards. It depends on how um, broken up or torn up they are, but obviously sometimes really poor condition can be a huge positive, um, because it will say something. I have a T3 turkey red of Vic Willis with a pinhole at the top and cigarette burns at the bottom, right? Like a cigarette ash or ember fell onto the card itself, and almost burned through the paper slightly, but didn't burn through all the way. So you can see those ember marks. Obviously, not even irony there, because I mean that's the turkey red is a cigarette issue. I mean, it was probably a turkey red cigarette. Um, this adds an element of richness to me, to these historical artifacts or these parts of baseball history, precisely because of the element of personal engagement. Um, and this is something, in regards to this ticket stub, which I think is unique and powerful about ticket stubs themselves. Um, this is an artifact of the event. And I brought up the Christy Mathewson 1915 Baseball Magazine supplement, because that's a park issue. It was issued in April of 1915, um, in baseball magazines that were only available for that month at baseball parks. So there's this element of the event that I feel is very important in terms of these historical artifacts. And that's something that's harder to see and feel in baseball cards, because they are obviously of their time, right? If you take like a T206 or 1910 Tip Top Red, they are artifacts of their time, but they're symbolic representations that are removed from the direct history of baseball itself. Um, and that's more so where my background is the direct history of baseball itself and interfacing with that. So it's interesting to get creative with that and to try to understand different outlets or ways to engage with that, especially in terms of like paper ephemera or paper artifacts. A lot of the magazine issues, right? Baseball Magazine or Sporting News, they have supplements, all sorts of things that came with them, as well as the covers. Um, Finding a way, because I think that's what a lot of what baseball cards are about. It's like finding a way into history, understanding and knowing history, or making history more immediate, because so much of what cards I think themselves are about, as well as I think a lot of styles of collecting of people who are engaged with cards, especially vintage, pre-war, that kind of thing, is stepping back into the time itself and being able to kind of reclaim and feel and kind of viscerally experience and understand history. Um, it's a big theme in the novels, Proust novels in particular. It's like there is an object that allows me to experience a memory, and I think in the case of a lot of baseball ephemera and artifacts, it's a memory that I didn't have, but it's a deeper, more collective, archetypal memory. So this, I mean, 1910 Red Sox. I really love the 1910s Red Sox teams. There's just so much rich history there, even before Babe Ruth joins the teams, and obviously that's like it's almost like a separate lifetime. when he's playing for the Red Sox as a pitcher as opposed to in the 20s with the Yankees as a hitter. The most important World Series matchups, I think, of the dead ball era, I'd say 1912 and 1916 for very different reasons. 1909, obviously, as well, very important, and 1905. But those two, I mean, obviously, Red Sox are the linchpins in those. And, I mean, Golden outfield. Jack Barry joins them from the $10,000 infield. There's a lot there. So I think those are my thoughts on this. I think it's important and interesting to think about, like, what is a window to history and why, and what are you trying to remember, and what's a real way in, because I think sometimes it's in something that's very strange or peculiar, or maybe it just doesn't, it's not being seen in the way that would allow you to enter into that world. Well, that's episode 2. There will be kind of more strangeness on the way. Good to talk to you. I'll see you on the next one.